Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master, Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Welcome to Window on the West, where we explore all the ages of Tolkien's Middle-earth, with your hosts, Jonathan Watson, Michael Grumbine, and Dan Coates.
Welcome to Window on the West. My name is Jonathan Watson from theonering.com. I'm here along with Michael Grumbine and Dan Coates.
Hey.
As we continue our journey through the Silmarillion. This week, we're going to be going through Valaquenta, essentially the second chapter of the Silmarillion. But before we do, we kind of want to take a little jovial turn, maybe, a little bit of a game, have a little fun. Something that we're going to call...
All that is gold does not glitter.
Also known as identify the Tolkien quote. So what we've done to see how good these guys are, because Michael has no excuse. He's read Tolkien his entire life. He reads it at least, once a year? The Lord of the Rings?
Sure, once a week, maybe. Yeah.
And Dan is a longtime fan now as well, having read a couple times. Couple times, very deliberately the last time on the podcast on the Babylon Bee. But here's what I've got. I've got 4 quotes that we're going to look at, and it is your job to determine which one is Tolkien. And bonus points if you can tell me who actually said the other fake quotes. We'll see if you guys are really even that good. You might get it. I don't know. We'll see. So here's the first one. The quote is, "It is safe to assert that no government proper ever had a provision in its organic law for its own termination." All right. It is safe to assert that no government proper ever had a provision in its organic law for its own termination. So the next one is, "Government is an abstract noun, meaning the art and process of governing, and it should be an offense to write it with a capital G or so as to refer to people." The next is this. "The working men are the basis of all governments, for the plain reason that they are the most numerous." The working men are the basis of all governments, for the plain reason that they are the most numerous. And then my last quote for you guys to earn your Tolkien bona fides is, "The increasing complexity and precariousness of our economic life have forced government to take over many spheres of activity once left to choice or chance." The increasing complexity and precariousness of our economic life have forced government to take over many spheres of activity once left to choice or chance.
So one of those is Tolkien, and the other 3 are not.
And the other 3 are not. Exactly.
Okay.
I only recognize one of those quotes. I think I've read another one, but I can't place. I can place one of the quotes.
Oh.
So I'm down to 3, but I'm not telling Dan which one I can place. that isn't Tolkien.
All right. If you guys each have an answer?
I do. I have an answer and I have a reason, but we'll see.
I'll take a guess.
All right, go for it, Dan. You go first.
I think the Tolkien quote is the second one. Government is an abstract noun, meaning the art and process of governing, and it should be an offense to write it with a capital G or so as to refer to people.
And why would you say that?
I think I've read that before, and I think that was a letter that Tolkien wrote to either his son or somebody. I don't know. Sound right?
That's pretty specific. I don't know. Michael, what do you think?
So my vote is the same as Dan's, but I did not know of this letter, if there is a letter, if he's right. But the reason, so I know the first one is not. The first one is Abraham Lincoln. And
you are correct. That is correct.
It's a great quote from Abraham Lincoln. But the second one, I'm going with the second one for the reason that Tolkien, being a philologist, is very concerned with words and their use, and always. And so this is a quote about word use. And so that's my guess, is the number 2 for the reason of philology.
Wow, you guys are amazing. You both got it right. I got to make this a lot harder. That's incredible. No, but I like
that. Was pretty good, actually.
Yeah, Dan, that you even remembered this. So clearly you've read this somewhere else. Not only have you read The Lord of the Rings twice, you've read all of his letters and have memorized them.
No. It must be just something I found in my anarchist days.
That's what they all say. Wow. And Michael, yeah, I'm not surprised that you brought that up, because that was one quote where, yeah, that would be a tip of the hat towards being a philologist, right? The word, the noun, and that sort of approach that he took in that phrasing of it. But it was a letter to Christopher Tolkien, November 29th, 1943.
Hey.
Very good. Wow, Dan.
Impressive.
Very impressive.
Is the next quote about the working men Karl Marx?
No.
No, it's not.
No. Do you know who that is, Michael? You got.
No, I don't. But I know Karl Marx's style, and that does not.
That is actually also Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, okay.
So that quote is, "The working men are the basis of all governments, for the plain reason that they are the most numerous." Yeah. I'm not sure exactly from what, but it's a quote from Abraham Lincoln.
Nice.
The last one: the increasing complexity and precariousness of our economic life have forced government to take over many spheres of activity once left to choice or chance.
Sounds socialist to me.
Milton Friedman.
There's a good chance Tolkien read this before it was published.
Oh,
you want to take a guess now? Yeah. Could it be C.S. Lewis? So yeah, that's C.S. Lewis. Oh shoot, I lost where that's from exactly, but that is a quote from C.S. Lewis.
Nice.
Well, Tolkien would have Lewis executed then, because he used government with a capital G.
Well, I don't know. That was just copy and pasted from. Yeah, I don't know if that was literally exactly how Lewis wrote it. So we won't judge him based on the.
Oh, okay.
Well, and besides, Tolkien and Lewis had plenty of stiff argument in the time.
So we're also going to take a little bit of a different tack this time in our second episode. We want to kind of, instead of being didactic in our approach of how we want to look at the Silmarillion, we're going to start off with something. Since Dan is the newcomer here to the Silmarillion, we're going to start off with
Dan's Big Thought.
This could be a mistake, but
well,
this is almost definitely the right kind of mistake if it's a mistake.
You're putting yourself out there by calling it big, Dan. So,
well, I don't know how big of a thought this is. So, the Valaquenta is interesting. It comes after like the Genesis account basically for Tolkien, and he just kind of keeps developing the idea with the Ainur that sang, and then Iluvatar brought that world into being. And so what's interesting to me is that the Valar have their own domains. So you have one Valar that's over the water, one that's over the air, one that's over the earth. And then we find out that there's 7 Valar and 7 queens of the Valar. Mm-hmm. And so my big thought, I guess, was the contrast between those Valar and Melkor, who we find out. And this kind of touches on a thought that I had from last week, too. I have thoughts that fold into other thoughts, apparently. But it kind of reminds me of something I was starting to get into last week, where Melkor was given the greatest gifts of power and knowledge. And how that kind of folded into, for what I was thinking of, like the problem of evil, getting into that whole free will, predestination thing of everything's been sung already, and then it goes into being. But the idea that, why was Melkor given the greatest gifts of knowledge and power? And my big thought for this week is how Melkor is contrasted against the Valar. He's envious, he's covetous, he's arrogant, he's jealous, he's a liar without shame. What's interesting to me is that he gets rejected by Varda, who is the queen of the lights, or of the starlight. And so maybe all of the history of evil in Tolkien's mythology could have been avoided if Varda just went on a date with Melkor. So that was kind of interesting.
Every destruction in the history of man, it comes back to unrequited love. Really,
yeah. So what's interesting to me is it kind of gets into for me this whole idea of how this character of Melkor that Tolkien is bringing up is that he can only corrupt. We find out that he has like this war with Aule, who's the Valar of the earth, and he can only mar what he does. He can only undo what he does. He's kind of like Satan in the sense that like he tempts other people with these promises of, hey, if you come work for me, I think he tempts one of the Maiar that is under Ulmo, He says, I'll give you the powers of Olmo. I'll give you his domain if you come and work for me. And it's just interesting to me that he makes these promises that, don't seem to be in his power to fulfill. So he can only destroy, he can only lie. It's a very interesting character, and how he's contrasted with the other Valar, who are simply just faithful in sticking to the domain that's been given to them.
When I look at him, right, like we were talking about last week, with the parallels that you can kind of see with legendary stories, and Melkor, I feel like he has as the primordial evil spirit of the universe. He has, I think, a different feel than the ones that we grow to or we know from other legendariums, or even from Satan. Right there, I mean, Satan, he's fallen. He rebelled, but there's so much more depth to Melkor and the relationship he has with the Valar, which we don't learn about necessarily when it comes to the Christian approach.
Right. There's not as much in the Christian scriptures, in Judaic scriptures. There's not as much about the character of Satan. Obviously, Tolkien's going to give us a lot more about the mind of Melkor or Morgoth as than we're going to get from any other epic tale. Because he just writes and writes about him. I mean, he is the great enemy throughout this book.
Yeah,
Sauron comes in only in other books. I mean, he makes an appearance or two in this book, but especially near the end, he makes more than one appearance. But Morgoth is definitely the chief foe for the first part of the book.
Yeah. So
it is interesting the similarities and differences. It's fascinating to me that Tolkien created a hierarchy in the way that it's easily crosswalked with other pantheons of gods from legend.
Mm-hmm.
He even mentions that the people of Middle Earth thought of the Valar as gods, and so there's a clear parallel there. And you can tie a number of the Valar to directly in myth. For example, Poseidon and Olmo.
Sure.
Or there are tremendous similarities between the two.
Even Zeus and Manwë.
Yes, although Zeus is a lot more fierce and direct. Manwë's descriptions are very interesting to me. For example, to compare the two, Manwë and Melkor were brothers. Melkor was the greatest in power,
mm-hmm.
but it said that the mightiest was Melkor, but Manwë was the dearest to Ilúvatar and understood most clearly his purposes.
Yeah,
and we will see also that Manwë is someone that he has a lot of trust. Like, he keeps hoping that his brother is going to be able to be reformed throughout this book. And what's interesting to me is that he sees clearly the purposes of Ilúvatar, but he doesn't understand evil the way that Ilúvatar does, clearly from the beginning, because Ilúvatar explains to Melkor exactly how it's going to go with him.
Yeah.
That he's going to keep trying to destroy and sow discord, and it's going to keep being turned back to Ilúvatar's own purposes. But Manwë keeps seeing, he and the Valar war with Melkor for many years, but I won't jump ahead too much. But I do think that there's these strong parallels with other mythos, and which Tolkien would, of course, not be trying to hide.
The particulars when it gets into the Maiar and the lesser beings, I always found those really interesting. The Valar enjoy Middle-earth. That's their jam. They want to be in Middle-earth. They love it. They want to bring, we'll find out, they want to bring the elves over, all that sort of stuff. It's the lesser beings, the Maiar, Ose and Eonwë and Olorin, and right, those characters that get their feet dirty, whereas like the Valar, so they're the heralds, they're the messengers. And so for all the love that the Valar have for it, it's like, we don't really want to get super duper involved in every little thing. And going back to this, I always thought that was curious that, and we learned that without a direct call to them from a character later in the future to get them involved, like, they won't get involved. And I'm not sure why that is, but I always thought that was a curious approach. I'm not sure if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Yep. I think we're going to get clues about why. I think they're going to say a few things directly. I think there's a wisdom in them not getting involved. So I do think pretty much their primary job, interestingly enough, is done before the arrival of the children of Ilúvatar. They are responsible for forming the earth,
yeah,
and for bringing about the land and the seas and preparing a place for the children of Iluvatar, and that's their mighty work. And then ultimately, they end up having a secondary job of protecting the children of Iluvatar from Melkor. But when they do so, it doesn't always end well.
No.
And so for the children of Iluvatar, and so I think there is a wisdom that we're going to see some there. But you're right that there's far more interaction with the Maiar, of which he has little to say in this chapter. Not nothing. Little.
But no. And one of them, I like this quote. This is one of the quotes that stuck out to me, where he talks about Sauron a little bit. And he mentions in all the deeds of Melkor, the Morgoth upon Arda, in his vast works and in the deceits of his cunning, Sauron had a part, and was only less evil than his master, in that for long he served another and not himself. So the only thing that made him less evil than Sauron than Morgoth was that he served Morgoth first before he only served himself. And that was the one thing that made him less evil. And it's sort of an interesting statement of, well, he's not 100% selfish throughout his entire life. He actually had to do something that wasn't only just for himself. I mean, maybe that's the argument. That quote stuck out to me, and I think there's some depth to that quote. That's what makes Morgoth pure evil, pure, like he was all about wanting the control and wanting the power. And so the only reason Sauron isn't that quite evil is because he had to serve Morgoth first.
And and by extension then, because I love that quote too, by extension, Sauron was that evil once Morgoth was gone.
True,
because then he was the one. I mean, it was all about him and his will and his desire to dominate.
Yeah, that's right.
My favorite quote of this entire reading, I have to admit, made me laugh. It's about Tulkas.
Mm-hmm.
Tulkas. He has little heed for either the past or the future, and is of no avail as a counselor.
Yeah, he'll just wrestle you. That's pretty much it.
Tolkien has a few backhanded compliments about Tulkas throughout the Silmarillion. But in the end, what's funny is he is the one. It is interesting to me. It shows you Tolkien's hierarchy of values too, because so he was a soldier, served in a war, understood the nature of using force to defend. Also understood the terrible nature of war, and so he makes the greatest warrior of the Valar the least of the Valar, and interesting in terms of so many other qualities, and he also laughs all the time. He has the opposite character to war, what would you usually find in warriors. So Tulkas is this laughing warrior, but he's the only one that goes toe to toe physically with Melkor in the end. With Morgoth.
I don't want to ruin it for you, Dan, but yeah. Speaking of being ruined, I think when I first read the Silmarillion, I was like seventh grade. I think I tried it, and I got to this chapter, and I was lost. I was like, I can't do this. All the names, all the descriptions.
It's just a list of names.
It is.
Right?
It feels like numbers, like the book of numbers. Yeah, it just lost me, and so I think this is kind of like we say that a lot of people get lost at the Council of Elrond. In Rivendell in the Fellowship of the Ring, because there's so much exposition there and so much story that maybe you're not familiar with and you're having trouble getting through. Same thing once you think like, Ainulindale, that's kind of beautiful, the whole song and that story of how the world and universe is created, and you get to this and you're like, who are these chaps? Like I don't really care who Ose is at this point. I have no relationship with that at all, and so it makes it tough. I feel like if Tolkien would have written this here, if he would have lived long enough to write this into a different chapter, so to speak, another way of getting this to us without making it so dry, I think that would have been really a big benefit to us readers. But I can live with it still. But coming to this from The Lord of the Rings was pretty rough for me as a kid.
Yeah. It is. It's a totally different type of.
Your 13-year-old daughter has read the Silmarillion like 5 or 6 times, so.
She has, and in fact, she asked me prior to this particular podcast. She said, asked me who my favorite of the Valar was.
Oh, and do you have one?
I do, and my favorite is the one that after all of my readings, I still messed up on the name because they never use his name. My favorite is Mandos, but his name is not Mandos. As is explained here and used almost nowhere else, his name is Namo.
Yeah, Namo.
And Mandos is the halls of the dead that the elves go to.
It's like Hades.
Right. He is like beset. He and Olmo are the two, probably for me, the strongest parallels with Greek mythology, for example.
Yeah.
Although Olmo more so, because Mandos's character is not like Hades, but he has a similar purview, and so yes, but his name is actually Namo, and his brother's name is Irmo, and both of them are known by the places they dwell instead of their actual names. So Irmo is known for the place, which is the forest of Lorien, of which Lothlorien is a pale reflection in Middle Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And then his brother Namo, who's my favorite, the quote about him: "He is the keeper of the houses of the dead and the summoner of the spirits of the slain. He forgets nothing, and he knows all things that shall be, save only those that lie still in the freedom of Iluvatar," which is a fantastic, to my mind, quote, because first of all, it explains to me why I like him so much, because he's an historian, right? He knows all things that were before. So he knows all the past, and he knows all the future, with the exception of those that lie within the freedom of Iluvatar, which gives a very interesting architecture to Tolkien's view on time in Middle Earth, because it's almost as if there's a plan and it's going to happen the way it's going to happen, with the exception of Iluvatar's free will to step in.
He's very. I like him a lot. I feel like he's kept at a distance, right? Like
he definitely is.
Through the stories, we get to know Varda and Manwë a lot more. Particularly Olmo, we get to know him quite a bit. There's the mystery about him, because it also is, the halls of Mandos is where the dead go, but we don't know what that really means.
Yeah, is that the dead elves or the dead men?
No, just
not men.
Dead elves.
So because the dead men go to Iluvatar, right?
Right.
Yeah, or as it says, I believe the Valar know not where.
Yeah. The mystery. It is one of those things that are still in the freedom of Iluvatar.
Right. So I have one of those basic questions that would come about for someone reading this for the first time.
Okay.
Several times in this chapter it mentions Aman, and it mentions that the Noldar beheld the Valar in Aman, and I'm wondering who, what, well, define all those terms.
Being Tolkien, there are many names for each place and person.
So are the Noldar the Eldar? Are that the same thing? And the Eldar the old elves?
Yeah, we're gonna get a full explanation, but the Noldor are one of the races of elves.
Okay. And so they beheld the Valar in Aman.
Right. So Aman is the land of the Valar, or portion of it. Well, actually, I think it's the whole thing.
And so that's not Middle Earth.
No.
Okay, that's where that map comes in handy.
See, I knew this was going to be a moment that Mr. Watson was going to pull up the atlas.
So if we go to, let's see.
While he's looking that up, Dan, who was your favorite of the Valar from the description given? I know you haven't read the whole rest of it, so you don't have an opinion in that regard.
The one that's described as a hunter, is that Orome? I thought that was interesting, because he's like just this guy that just doesn't describe him having some kind of instrument, and he's able to play music, and he's all about the hunt inside the forest. And
the horn. Yes, I was wondering, like, yeah, he has a horn. I don't know if he has other music.
So he's less strong than Tolkis, but more dreadful in anger. And whereas Tolkis laughs ever in sport or in war, and even in the face of Melkor, he laughed in battles before the elves were born. Orome loved the lands of Middle Earth, and he left them unwillingly and came last to Valinor. And oft of old he passed back east over the mountains and returned with his host to the hills and the plains. He's a hunter of monsters and fell beasts, and he delights in horses and hounds, and all trees he loves.
So Aman, just so we all know, it is like we were saying, it is the blessed realm, right? But it's the continent, right? So there are, and what's funny is I think this goes into it next. As we read more into the next chapters, we'll hear these words more. But there's Aman. On Aman is Valinor, which is, I believe that's the city, right, officially, or that the domain. Or Taniquetil is that's the mountain on Aman. That's the highest point. And then I'm trying to remember all the little bits here. So yes, Aman is the land where the Valar live, the continent where the Valar live.
So this is all the undying lands that are in the west, over the ocean across from Middle Earth.
Yeah, although there is kind of like the world is flat right now, and so
what?
Yeah.
It's a flat Earth.
It's a flat Earth.
It is indeed.
Really?
Yes. There are, so if you see, like, there's the encircling ocean, there's the edges of the world. Like, you can look at the map, and if you have it with you, if you look at it, it'll say, like, it's flat, and there's the encircling sea, and then there are the edges, and then you can't go beyond that. Eventually, Earth is made round, and that's why where you hear, they sail into the west, because there is one straight path to get to Valinor still, because Valinor ends up, or Aman, Valinor, ends up no longer being in the circles of the earth, down like at the end of Return of the King.
Well said. Yeah, that's well said.
Clearly, there's a lot to remember. Dan, you don't know all this yet? Come on.
Yeah. So when Frodo and everybody leaves Middle Earth and they sail west, they don't actually sail west in the sense of sailing around the planet. They take a straight path off into some other realm.
Think globe. And then they leave on a tangent and go off.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
That's kind of the idea.
But at this point, what you're saying is that the world is flat, and Aman and Valinor, they are on the same plane as everything else.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I totally did not get that reading through this the first time.
And it doesn't make that much difference, actually. Like the way it works. It makes a difference at a few points, but not in the way where it's always referring to the Earth being flat or anything like that. I mean, for all intents and purposes, when people interact with the Earth and the people around them, they treat it as flat anyway, because when it comes to stories and such, there's very little that has to do with the Earth being round that affects the inner workings of a story. Now that we've shocked him with the flat Earth theory.
I had no idea Tolkien was a flat
earthers.
Yeah.
We're all flat Middle Earthers. We're not flat Earthers. I liked his passage on Olorin, or Olorin, and as we often say.
Yeah.
And about how even he's noteworthy even before the main story.
Yeah.
So it's Olorin is Gandalf. I think you know that, Dan.
I didn't know that, so now I do.
It is mentioned in
there you go.
Briefly in the book, I think, in Return of the King. The elves call him Olorin.
Yes. So wisest of the Maiar was Olorin. So he was in fact, of all the Maiar, he was the wisest, which is quite a impressive characteristic, considering there are quite a few Maiar. There's just not a lot that are named. And so it tells about how he walked the earth unseen amongst the elves most of the time.
Yeah.
Which was interesting.
He's not mentioned a whole lot more than this in the entire Silmarillion. So
correct. I think most here.
Yeah.
Maybe one or two other mentions, but not much.
So interesting. So in this description, Olorin says he walked often in the house of Nienna, and he learned pity and patience, and he loved the elves, and he walked among them unseen. So you're kind of getting a picture of who Gandalf is before you see Gandalf. Interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't catch that when I was reading it. I'm just like, who's this Olorin guy? Yeah, that's great. So Olorin doesn't really come up very much in the Silmarillion.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. I realized in reading all this here and talking about the names, what we need is like the Message version, Eugene Peterson's version of the Silmarillion, where all these references are brought to us on a more colloquial level.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we can close this one off. We're going to move on next week to the Quenta Silmarillion. Actually get that started and go through chapter 1 of the Beginning of Days. Before we do close, though,
if you like Tolkien,
when we started thewandering.com in 1999, I had a friend of mine, a close friend of mine, who'd never read any Tolkien, never read The Hobbit, Silmarillion, or Lord of the Rings, never. And this was before the films came out, so he hadn't seen the films either. Convinced him to write an article for every chapter of the Silmarillion, the Hobbit, and the Lord of the Rings, and read it through, starting with the Silmarillion, going through the Lord of the Rings. And he did this for 3 years and like 4 months. I don't remember how many articles it is. It's obviously over 100. I'd have to go in and check.
That's quite impressive.
But we called it a Tolkien Virgin. So, and it was quite popular. Like we got thousands of views or tens of thousands weekly on it. And there were, deep discussions on our message boards at the time, which are no longer around. But we do have that still up. So if you're curious, you can go to theonering.com/virgin, and that'll forward you to a list of all that. And it'll be in chronological order. And it's a fun read. It's old now. But it's still just going through the Silmarillion, and it's interesting because his take is from the Silmarillion first, then to the Hobbit, then to the Lord of the Rings.
Oh wow!
And so he has the entire knowledge of the Silmarillion before going into the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. And so when he comes up at the end and he goes through the bits of history that we see in the Lord of the Rings from the Silmarillion, he has that knowledge of who those characters are. And when they're brought up, it was really interesting to see him read through the Lord of the Rings with the knowledge of the Silmarillion already buried in his mind. Like he knew these things already. It was an interesting read. So something to look back at if you guys are interested at some point in the future.
That's cool.
So,
yeah, well.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for listening, and glad to have you along, and we'll catch you next week.
Yep. We finally get into, a bit about the elves. Bye.
Michael, Dan, and Jonathan want to thank you, the listener, for joining us. Visit us at theonering.com, your source for everything Tolkien, where you can comment on this episode and join the conversation. This is Austin Robertson, bidding you farewell. May the wind under your wings bear you where the sun sails and the moon walks.